asleep.
Good evening and welcome to this meeting of Troy City Council for Monday, September 20th, 2021. My name is William Lutz, President of Council. We will begin tonight's meeting with the Invocation and Pledge of Allegiance given by Mrs. Sneed. Please stand.
Please join me in prayer. Lord, as we gather tonight to discuss the business of our city, we pray that you will give us all strength to continue to work together to solve the issues before us. We thank you for your protection of our city through those who serve as first responders, those who help provide public services, and those who help heal us. Continue to bless them and all our citizens. Help us listen well, seek to understand, and provide us all with a spirit of unity and peace. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mrs. Sneed. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Swayzer?
Here.
Mr. Terwilliger?
Here.
Mr. Twist?
Here.
Mr. Rozell?
Here.
Mr. Whidden?
Here.
Mr. Schilling?
Here.
Mrs. Sneed?
Here.
Mr. Phillips?
Present.
Mr. Siebert?
Motion to excuse Mr. Siebert.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips to excuse Mr. Sievert with a second by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Terwilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer?
Yes.
Mr. Siebert is excused.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read a summary of the minutes of the September 7th, 2021 meeting of Troy City Council?
Minutes of council, September 7, 2021. Public hearing was held on ordinance number 048, 2021. Committee reports. Community and Economic Development Committee recommended legislation be prepared to establish guidelines for residential exterior housing improvement program. Committee recommended the legislation be prepared regarding the three items required for the Blackmore Hill annexation. Finance Committee recommended legislation be prepared declaring a surplus some small pieces of city property. Personnel Committee recommended legislation be prepared amending FSLA exempt salary ordinance to abolish a position. Resolution number R36, 2021, Municipal Services for Blackmore Hill annexation, first reading and adopted. Resolution number R37, 2021, Buffer Statement for the Blackmore Hill annexation was given first reading and adopted. Resolution number R38, 2021, Consent to Annexation of Blackmore Hill annexation, first reading and adopted. Resolution number R39, 2021, Administer a Residential Exterior Housing Improvement Loan Program, first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 048, 2021, a rezoning was given second reading. Ordinance number 049, 2021, amending salary ordinance was given first reading and was adopted. Ordinance number 050, 2021, declaring a surplus certain property of the city, first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 051, 2021, a reappropriation, first reading and adopted. Following comments, council adjourned at 7:30 p.m.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. How's council wish to dispose of the minutes?
Second.
It's been moved to approve the minutes by Mr. Rozell, seconded by Mrs. Sneed. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer?
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger?
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Moving on to committee reports, we have 3 written and 1 verbal report this evening. We'll begin with the Community and Economic Development Committee and Mrs. Sneed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Committee members Rozell and Sneed met on September 13th to review the recommendation of the Troy Planning Commission that 3 parcels at 1400 Wayne Street, 920 Summit Avenue, and Crescent Rear be rezoned from R7 Multiple Family Residential District to OR1 Office Residential District. This committee supports the recommendation of the Troy Planning Commission regarding this proposed rezoning and recommends that council adopt ordinance number 048, 2021. And this is respectfully submitted by Mr. Rozell, Mr. Twist, and myself as chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Sneed. Do council members have any comments or questions on the report? Seeing none, we'll move on to the Safety and Health Committee and Mr. Terwilliger.
Thank you, Mr. President.
On September 13th, this committee met to consider the ratification of the Miami County Solid Waste Management Plan update. The Miami County Solid Waste District was established in 1989, and the plan is updated approximately every 5 years. There has been no change to the core programs that were part of the prior approved plan, and there have been some enhancements. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared approving the Miami County Solid Waste Management Plan update. This is respectfully submitted by Mr. Rozell, Mr. Schilling, and myself, Mr. Twilliger, as chair.
Thank you, Mr. Terwilliger. Are there any comments or questions on this report? Seeing none, we'll move on to the Streets and Sidewalks Committee and Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. President. The committee met on September 13 to consider acceptance of a right-of-way along South County Road 25A and Dye Mill Road as recommended by the Planning Commission, as well as accepting a water line easement. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the acceptance of 0.514 acres of right-of-way that is part of in-lots 930 and 9306 located along South County Road 25A and Dye Mill Road, and the acceptance of a 10-foot water line easement along Dye Mill Road. And this is respectfully submitted by Mr. Schilling and Mrs. Snee and myself as chair.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Any comments or questions on this report? Our final report is a verbal report this evening from the Law and Ordinance Committee and Mrs. Snee.
Thank you. The Ohio Division of Liquor Control has transmitted the notice of a stock transfer of existing permits for the 3 Speedway LLC locations at 1475 South Market Street, 1894 West Main Street, and 818 North Market Street. The Police Department has not recommended an objection or hearing request be filed, and the notice has now been announced.
Thank you, Mrs. Snee. I do have one question. Should that 1475 South Market actually be West Market?
I will check the form, and I think that would be the right address. I think I copied these from the forms. I will double check the addresses on the
Yeah.
forms.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right. Any other comments or questions on the report? All right. Thank you, Mrs. Knight. We'll move on to citizen comments. If you have any comments on any items of the agenda, we have 2 resolutions and 2 ordinances. You're welcome to come to the lectern, give your name and address. You have 2 minutes to address council. Seeing no one move forward, we'll move into resolutions. Mrs. Knight, will you please read Resolution R40, 2021?
Resolution number R40, 2021, resolution to approve the Miami County Solid Waste Management District's amended draft solid waste management plan. This is the first reading.
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved to suspend the 3 reading rule by Mr. Phillips, seconded by Mr. Terwilliger. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes. Move to adopt.
Second.
The 3 reading rule has been suspended, been moved to adopt the resolution by Mr. Schweizer, seconded by Mr. Rozell. Are there any final comments or questions on the resolution? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer?
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Rozell?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read Resolution R41, 2021?
Resolution number R41, 2021, resolution authorizing tax levies for the City of Troy, Ohio for the fiscal year beginning January 1, 2022, as determined by the Budget Commission, and certifying such levies to the county auditor and declaring an emergency. These certifications are based on the tax budget approved by council in July, and the emergency clause is due to the fact these must be returned to the county auditor by October 1, first reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
It's been moved to suspend the 3 reading rule by Mr. Rozell, seconded by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
Yes.
Mr. Whitten.
Yes.
Move for adoption.
Second.
Three reading rule's been suspended. It's been moved to adopt the resolution by Mr. Phillips, seconded by Mrs. Snee. Any final comments or questions? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
Yes.
Mr. Whitten,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling.
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. We'll move on to ordinances. Mrs. Knight, will you please give the third reading to ordinance 048, 2021?
Ordinance number 048, 2021, an ordinance changing the zoning of parcel numbers DO8 057010, DO8 057020, and DO8 057015 in the city of Troy, Ohio, from R7 Multiple Family Residential District to OR1 Office Residence District. This has been recommended for approval by the Troy Planning Commission. This is the third reading.
Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved to adopt the ordinance by Mr. Phillips, seconded by Mrs. Snee. Are there any final comments or questions? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
Yes.
Mr. Whitten,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee.
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read the last ordinance of the evening? Ordinance 052, 2021.
Ordinance number 052, 2021. Ordinance accepting dedication of right-of-way along South County Road 25A and Dye Mill Road and acceptance of a waterline easement along Dye Mill Road in the city of Troy, Ohio. This is the first reading. The right-of-way dedication has been recommended by the Troy Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. House counsel wish to move?
Move to suspend.
Second.
It's been moved to suspend the three reading rule by Mrs. Snee, seconded by Mr. Schweizer. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
Yes.
Mr. Whitten,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes. Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved to adopt the ordinance by Mr. Phillips, seconded by Mr. Schweizer. Are there any final comments or questions? Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Terwilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
Yes.
Mr. Whitten,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer.
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Moving on to communications and announcements. Mrs. Knight, are there any this evening?
No, sir.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Moving on to comments of officials, we'll begin with Director of Public Service and Safety, Mr. Titterington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just three of them. First of all, the Tunnels to Towers event. If you had the opportunity to go, to visit, to just mingle downtown, it was great weather, well coordinated, calm, respectful. We had approximately 4,000 people go through the exhibit. And kudos to everybody who was involved in coordinating that, and thanks to the sponsors that made it happen, UVMC Premier, Kettering Health, the Troy Foundation, the Robinson Fund, and the Duke Foundation all contributed to that, and so we are thankful for their generosity. The Farmers Market on Cherry Street, the last morning, Saturday morning for it, will be on the 26th from 9 to noon. That will be it for the season for them. And then, like a broken record, I'll bring up the fact that we have trick-or-treating. It will be on the Thursday, the 28th from 6 to 8, rain or shine. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Titterington. Moving on to Director of Law, Mr. Herbert.
I don't have anything this evening, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Herbert. City Auditor, Mr. Friggy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have nothing at this time.
Thank you, sir. Do any council members have any comments that they'd like to make this evening? Mr. Whidden.
I saw a few complaints or questions this week about this is not what's going on with the dam this week. This is just routine maintenance. This isn't anything connected to
Sure. So, no, this is the annual maintenance that they do, about annual. MCD, Miami Conservancy District, they maintain the dam. So we pulled the gates. That's why the river is down. Again, it's routine maintenance. By the end of the month, the gates will be put back in, and it'll go back to water level is quote-unquote normal.
So, yeah, so for anyone concerned, the open mud flat that the river is right now is not the final plan.
That is correct.
Thank you
That is a
much.
temporary condition.
Thank you, Mr. Whidden. Any other comments from council members? We open it up for comments from the public. If you wish to address council on any subject, you are more invited to come to the lectern, give your name and address, and take as much time as you wish to consume.
Hi, my name is Brad Petrie. I'm the solid waste coordinator for Miami County. I actually came to represent the plan this evening. I live at 8940 Troy Sidney Road in Piqua. I just wanted to thank you all for your quick approval of the plan, and I actually offer myself, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer those for you.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Petrie?
Cool.
I think we're good.
Thank you all.
Thank
I much
you.
appreciate it.
Any other residents wish to address council this evening? Please come forward, give your name and address, and take as much time as you wish.
My name is Steve Kalmar. I live at 436 Miami Street, Troy. I'm consultant to the Wayne Street rezoning. We worked through the process. It worked nicely, worked well. There were no questions. I do intend to stay as consultant to that project until we find out what the plan really will be. It will be according to the legislation that was drawn a lot of years ago, but I want to assure council that it'll be a good project when it's done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kalmar. Anyone else wish to address council this evening? Seeing none, we will adjourn this meeting of council. Our next meeting will be October 4th, 2021, 7 o'clock, right here at Troy City Hall Council Chambers. Thank you for your time.